Okay, great to be here on home turf in this beautiful room. Thanks so much to Naomi and the foundation and to Robert and Jesse and everyone for putting this together and inviting me, and especially thanks to the Melbourne School of Design, as Andrew mentioned, for contributing as well. My talk is titled How to Make the Next City, which is also the book that I'm working on. Yeah, we're here to talk about livability, about livable cities. So yeah, I'm proud of Melbourne and its livable, top of the list of livable cities. On the website for the conference, it's written in scare quotes, but I don't think I share that suspicion. The rest of the world is jealous of what we take for granted. They're jealous of our amazing tram networks, of our green cities that's been redesignated an urban forest. They're jealous of the fine grain of shops in the laneways or in Fitzroy, Collingwood, the inner suburbs. We've got amazing universities. We've got incredible design and architecture scene, which we see here today. And companies taking on the world. So if any of the rest of my talk sounds critical, it's because it comes from a place of love. And it's true, though, that those benefits are not available to everyone. So I am designing my brother's house, which is in Kyneton, which is probably 90 minutes out of Melbourne. And on the way back, we came through Sunbury, and I thought, far out, let's have a look. This is the real edge of Melbourne. So Sunbury, for those of you who don't know, is about 40 kilometres from the centre. It is an old country town, so it's established in the 1850s, I think, and it's recently been redesignated as part of Melbourne, effectively, by the urban growth boundary having now including Sunbury. So this is the result. This is what's happening here. And normally architects are quite sneery about suburbs and dismissive of this kind of lifestyle and of building in this way. But it was really interesting to zoom in and to try and understand the appeal of living out here. And of course, there's so many benefits. You own the land that you're on. That's a big difference from I live in an apartment. In Sunbury, of course, you've got all the infrastructure already there. It's an existing town, so you've got a great train station, you've got a hospital, you've got good schools. The homes are affordable. These are half the price of the Melbourne average, even though they are going up. And it's all been quite well planned. So Hume Council are doing this in a careful, managed way. But your commute is 90 minutes. And as we know, most of the new jobs in the city are happening within 5 kilometres of the centre. So we have this urban structure now, which is dependent on cars, dependent on roads. And as Dan said earlier, those are long bets. They're things which once we build those roads, we cement our culture and our way of living along those lines. So, look, I've got a Brompton under the stairs. They've got a dirt bike and somewhere to run it. I mean, what's not to love? Yeah. But as this, The Age have been hammering away at this lately, which has been really good. I think their campaign throughout July to look at the way the city's developing. And this quote really stuck out to me. So Nishtha, who is an accountant with Deloitte, or she was rather, her commute was 90 minutes and had to decide, do I want to keep this job and never see my kids, or do I have to quit? And she resigned in order to support her family. So that's the sort of real effects of the city that we're building, if you like. And yeah, not to mention traffic, sprawl, public services, and looking ahead. I mean, we're adding 300 people a day to Melbourne, so that's 100,000 a year, and that's projected for the next 20, 30 years to become a city of 8 million people. So I feel a bit like, excuse me. It's always nice coming back home to have those fresh eyes and to step back in a way and think, you know, you're freed from the day-to-day struggles and the day-to-day reactions in a way. You can step back and make an observation and maybe look at the city with clear eyes. And it seems to me that the way we're designing is very reactive, and it seems very logical as well. You know, we've got loads of traffic, let's build more roads. We've got loads of people coming in, let's build huge apartment buildings. But it's sort of reinforcing a behaviour or a culture which perhaps is not one that we would aspire to if we had that longer view. So that's really what I was going to speak to today, is to, yeah, how can we sort of, what's the longer view and what are those trends? So first of all, to just click through some really quick stats which I've pulled together. That's the population graph, where we are and where it's headed. So there are many more of us. We're getting older. This is a sort of frightening bulge of population and ageing projected over time. Older people cost a lot to look after. I was completely blown away by this chart, which is age-related government spending. So as soon as you hit 60, I mean, we talk about the health crisis and ageing, but as soon as you hit 60, you are really expensive. Look at that. Health, pension, aged care, boom. And because of that, that's all the new jobs that we're creating. So down the very bottom there, you can see health and social assistance. We're at that 7% job growth compared to much far and ahead any other industry. So we're in this position where we're aging and then we're employing people to manage ourselves, which is a sort of strange way to go about it. Of course, many more women are entering the workforce. This is looking back since the late 70s, and that's terrific. Of course, we need to celebrate this equality, but the men aren't retreating or picking up the slack. So as it was described in Annabel Crabb's brilliant book, working women have got 2 jobs now. They're looking after the home and the kids, and they're working full time. And so something's got to give, I think. We're living further out. I mentioned the urban growth boundary being redesignated in 2012. And yeah, as I mentioned, all the new jobs are in the centre of the city. We're building lots of apartments. Look at that spike. And there are fewer people per home. So that's across the 20th century, really. We used to have an average of almost 5 people per home, and now it's closer to 2. And I think 30% of homes are single-person homes. So many of us are living alone. House prices have doubled in the time I've been living overseas, which is sort of, good reason not to come back. And the internet is getting really fast. That's an exponential graph. It might seem slow here in Melbourne, and it really does. It's like, I'll turn the video off on my Skype call type thing. But that you can't deny that graph and what that might allow us to be able to do. So what does it all add up to? Taken together, it feels like we're becoming an increasingly diffuse society at the scale of the individual family unit and at the scale of the city. Many more of us need care, and more of us need to be carers. We're building taller, but we're also continuing to spread out. We're tending towards gender parity in careers, but we're struggling to balance that with our families. We want freedom and autonomy and a dirt bike, but that's propped up by vast infrastructures of social and physical. Basically, we want the suburbs, but the suburbs aren't going to look after us. They're a 20th century typology that no longer fits the 21st century life. And the internet's really fast. So how do we make the next suburb, I think, is the real challenge going forward, the next couple of decades. How do we retrofit the suburbs to become socially, environmentally, economically supportive places in their own right, rather than merely places to sleep between commutes? And the suburbs are perfect for this. That's the amazing advantage of the structure that's already existing. It's perfect to be evolved, to be adapted, to be transformed from the bottom up in incremental ways. So I've put together a series of examples from all over the world, which I think we can look to and learn from when we come to adapting our existing suburbs. Spanish architect Andres Jaque, he conducted an audit of the IKEA catalogue and discovered that 92% of the people in the images were young, 98% of them were blonde, and all of them had some sort of family life. So we've seen the statistics, it's quite long way away from reality. And his argument is that this inability to confront the reality of how we're living, of our new family structures, simply reinforces those old stereotypes, and it doesn't feed its way into the way we're living. So what he did was discover various different forms of family. So you have two couples living together. You have a woman who's set up a hairdressing salon in her front room. This guy's running a bit like Marissa's green wall projects. He's got an organic aquaculture farm in his bedroom. And this other guy lives in a granny flat shed and looks after the garden in exchange for free rent. So, these are the sorts of, specific examples of different ways of living and different lifestyles which can form the ingredients for new housing typologies, effectively. And he then, for MoMA, he put this all together into a kind of co-living performative structure, invited all these people who he interviewed, and then built the framework out of things from IKEA. David and Grace, other architects, and their incredible offset house, which is looking really at the we saw in Marissa's statistics, Australia has the largest homes in the world. How can we, again, adapt that framework, perhaps shrink the private space and create a semi-public space in between, knock down the fences in between the homes, a bit like what Dan presented this morning with the Baugruppen in Berlin, create these public zones between us. So that's a great example of suburban retrofit. And there's amazing precedents here in Melbourne, of course, too. So this is Molesworth Street and Kew by Graham Gunn, Merchant Builders. And you can see on the plan here the incredible shared terrain between those private houses. Deconstruct the home. Moriyama House by Nishizawa in Tokyo. Again, instead of one apartment building, it's different. It's been divided into different blocks, which creates a certain amount of privacy, but also amazing intermediate spaces and public spaces. And there's no fence to that building too. So, as a member of the public, you can just walk straight through it. And again, in Melbourne, this beautiful social housing project by Bent, which is out in Dandenong, is doing that in a way, through arranging different supportive homes and different scales all together in a kind of terrain. Project in Perth by Officer Woods called the Civic Suburb starts to challenge the street again. So we took that tour through Sunbury. It's dominated by garage doors, and by the crossovers, maybe a couple of trees, a front door. How can we reclaim the nature strip? You didn't see any people in that video except for the guys cleaning the motorbike. How can we use that space? Again, there's no backyards anymore. 80% site coverage for the suburbs. How can we use the front streets to create this shared infrastructure? Again, here in Melbourne, Martin Architects amazing project, which is a front extension again. We always talk about box on the back, backyard extension, but we tend not to think about the front yard. Infill small lots. This is just around the corner from where I live in London. Solid Space is a small development agency which looks for those sneaky sites, the corner sites, the leftover bits of land above a railway line or what have you, buys them up, employs great architects and makes these beautiful infill projects. And an example like this might not seem much, but when you start to look for them, they're everywhere. And a lot of that densification can happen within the cracks of the existing structure of the city. Dan presented this as well already this morning. Another project in Perth, which is sharing energy at a neighbourhood scale through solar power and batteries. I understand this to be using blockchain. So again, there's a kind of technological system of trust that's built into this through the way the energy is exchanged. And that sort of stuff is it's a great reinforcement of social forms of trust as a sort of adjunct to that. So it doesn't replace it, I don't think. City Plot, Amsterdam, Studio 9 Dots. Again, this is trying to work out where the top-down and the bottom-up meet. I mean, we have this amazing individual structure of the suburb, but there's so many benefits to creating neighbourhood-scale systems of sharing. So this is a space for free development, but underneath it you have shared energy, shared water, shared waste, and shared public spaces, and also workspaces and working from home, all built into the urban structure. It's meant to be zero carbon and flood resistant and resistant to climate change. Interestingly, their research and their examples points at Melbourne. So I mentioned that the world's jealous of our urban structure. Well, these guys are in Amsterdam, and they're looking at Carlton. So, we've got all the right tools here already. We may not even realise it. And again, this is a sort of new build version of a similar thing. It's by Effect, Regen Villages it's called. This is completely off the grid, zero carbon, generates all its own energy, collects its own water, even all its own food. So you kind of end up living in a greenhouse, if you like. You've got your garden there, plus other shared gardens, etc. And it's a closed loop system, so waste from the food goes into the biogenerator, which powers the cars, which solar power goes to the, you get the idea. And then also to patch together this social infrastructure. So I mentioned that 30% of us are living alone, but there's something about going to a restaurant on your own that's really tragic. So designer Marina van Goor in Amsterdam again, she's created this restaurant which is called Eenmaal, which is, David will correct me, but I think it's effectively meal for one. Thank you. There are no shared tables in this restaurant. So you turn up on your own and you get your own single table. You sort of face away from other customers so that you're not required to speak to them. And somehow it might encourage people to leave the house and go out for dinner instead of, I don't know, microwaving a pasta. And then another one with a slightly more serious brief. This is a project which I came across in Belfast when I was there giving a talk, and ended up interviewing the shop owner. He said, look, this is what's known as an interface, so that's between the Protestant and Catholic neighbourhoods. What happens is over time, the neighbours will fight. That whole block was burned down. The council then clear it, they fence it, and it becomes a sort of buffer zone so that presumably you don't even need to look at someone who you don't like as you walk down the street. he doesn't claim to have any grand vision. He said, look, I bought this spot off the council, put my shop here, right on the intersection. I'm here every morning, 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. I've got a big glass front, I keep an eye on the street, clean off the graffiti when I get in. I've got chickens. And, maybe people, I don't tell people what my religion is, but they'll come into my shop, they'll see someone else, they might see a guy wearing a hoodie who they might be afraid of, but they'll hear me chatting to him, and then maybe that slowly over time can change the way we relate to each other. So again, this is, I would say, an architectural project. It's a very simple project driven by an amazing person with a sort of modest vision. But again, how can that help us how can shops help us to live together? More negotiating of semi-public space. Brilliant project by Herman Hertzberger, I think from the 70s. Those 4 photos are taken from the same spot. The building was installed with these, regular street tiles that are everywhere in Holland. The neighbours could then lift them up, plant trees, leave spaces for their cars to park, and over time they sort of collectively and independently defined this semi-public space. So instead of having fences, they've worked it out over time. Sharing, the benefits of sharing. This is a project by Go Hasegawa, the Japanese architect, commissioned by Airbnb for a housing expo. After the housing expo, it was moved to this village in Japan, which is, again, it's aging and it's decline. The young people are leaving, and it's economically not resilient. So it's become a kind of guest house for the city. It's listed on Airbnb, and the profits from Airbnb are then shared amongst the community. So and everyone works there to prepare the house, to greet the guests, and all the rest. So it becomes a sort of proxy community building, but also an economic generator. This is something I've been thinking about for a little while, an old project of mine when I used to hold the pen. A project for Sydney for a couple who were, they had an amazing site within a row of terraces, but they were worried about being overstretched. She was starting her own company, didn't want to have huge overheads of paying the rent, effectively, of the mortgage. So I proposed turning their house into a sort of community space to have a rent out one of the, to have a studio that they could rent out. She could have her office there, but also to have a sort of public space where people could, the community could use, and then a shared garden out the back where you could grow things and all the rest. They didn't build it. And Dan's already showed a project this morning of Atelier Bow Wow. This project, which I visited a few years ago, is their home and office in Tokyo. The section here on the right is a sort of gradient of publicness. So you come in on the left there, and then you can either go down into the studio or up into the meeting room. And the further up you go, you enter into their private house. So at the very top is their bedroom and the living room in the middle, which is... the other amazing thing about this project is that they bought the land off 3 different neighbours. So they kind of patched together 3 different backyards and then built this amazing tower. And then so that's a shot of the interior. It's a bit low for me. Sort of bump your head, but that's okay, it's Tokyo. And despite being on this hugely compressed site, they've still allowed views out from the rooms to sort of bring the city in and to increase the sense of space within the building. So that's sort of the idea. Let's turn Sunbury into Seoul. Or Templestowe into Tokyo, or whatever you like. But again, I think we can learn from these kinds of cities. It sounds ridiculous, but why not? these cities which have also expanded hugely in terms of population, and they've worked within the existing structure of privately owned blocks to increase the density and to increase their self-sufficiency. So how do we get there, though? I'm really interested in practices. This is my book, which is Future Practice, which was mentioned, and it was subtitled Conversations from the Edge of Architecture. When I wrote that, I was really thinking about people who are not really architects. They might be coming from education or come from, organising events, or they might be digital people, and how can we learn their tactics and import them back to architecture? But the response to it was I would go on the radio here and I would get a call from someone in far north Western Australia saying, "Oh, I just heard you on the radio." They found my phone number on my website. And I'm an architect up here, I'm working with local communities, and it really speaks to me, this idea of the edge, and that we need a different way of thinking about architecture that's defined not by the centres. So I think we can learn. I think the suburbs also are part of that edge. Architecture hasn't really taken the suburbs seriously. Maybe we've taken the suburbs ironically. We've kind of analysed them from a visual perspective. I'm thinking of people like Venturi or FAT. But what does it mean to really engage with the structures and the economic and sustainable resiliency of these places? The book was written immediately after the crash. And again, many people were casting around for what the future of the profession might be after all the architects were laid off. I used two quotes to both scare my students and hopefully inspire them to get back on the horse. This is Paul Nakazawa from Harvard saying that the foreseeable future only requires about half of the pre-recession workforce in architecture. Those who remain in the profession need to augment their knowledge. And then Bruce Mauer, from the interview I did with him, if you think about architecture as a methodology, independent from the outcome, you would see that architecture has a deep culture of synthesis informed by civic values. If you have that capacity, that's the most valuable capacity of any time in history. So there's a certain sense of crisis and opportunity here, which is captured by those two people. And it's also a sense of, well, what if you were to reapply your skills and your knowledge in other territories, in other domains? I mentioned lots of small plots, all privately held, perfect for reinvention, very distributed in terms of ownership and in terms of power. Andy Fergus and Kath Sunderman, who are here, I think, did a great studio with the Melbourne School of Design, went over to Amsterdam, collaborated with the Delft, I think, and did a great presentation on the sort of development model that happens here in Melbourne. Developers in the room were crying out for a structure like that in Holland, where you've got what they termed mum and dad developers. So again, because of this more fine-grained ownership, you don't need a huge amount of capital or public commitment in order to develop the city. A practice that's modest. We lost Paul Falleros last year, tragically. His practice, Health Habitat, was a completely different attitude to what being an architect can be. He was working mainly with Indigenous communities, and I would call it a sort of modest but vast practice. In 15 years of Health Habitat, he did repairs on 7,500 houses. So improving countless lives. I mean, I look at his model. I mean, 7,500. An architect's whole career, you might do 100, and he managed that in 15 years. So it's a bit more like the model of the GP. Instead of seeing 10 projects a year, you see 10 people a day. And I think that's, perhaps we can fork our practice now. How else are we going to deal with 300 people a day arriving in Melbourne? You simply can't manage it from the top down. Again, technology is opening up new opportunities for construction. So this is WikiHouse. It's basically the sort of thing which in every presentation on the future of architecture, you'll see this in there. And it is that radical, I think. So it's a huge challenge to our professional expertise. Here you go. Here's your open source cutting kit. We've engineered it so it will stand up if you do it properly. Take it away. No architect involved. I think that's quite exciting. The other aspect is where it gets really interesting is that it's not just about the physical structure. They're now expanding into rainwater systems, energy systems, waste systems. So it becomes a sort of open source toolkit for a complete new kind of architecture. This is Black Horse Workshop in London. It's a community workshop facility, building facility. Again, in this new suburb, we're going to need one of these on every corner. Project from Rotterdam, Zeus, who it's quite a long story, but effectively they crowdfunded a pedestrian footbridge to connect various neighbourhoods within the city. What's really beautiful about it, you can see just on the left there, each of the people who backed the project have their name carved into the bridge itself. So it becomes a kind of one-to-one diagram of the crowdfunding process. When you speak to Christian and Elmer, they'll tell you it's not about the bridge, it's about all the things that it's enabled to be attached to that bridge. So it's infrastructure in the truest sense. In London, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, I think is gently repurposing his office and the Greater London Authority, the planning office, to become more of a platform rather than a sort of top-down operation. So one of their new initiatives is called Crowdfund London. Effectively, if you can get a group together in your local neighbourhood, present a project, gather local support, you can pitch it to this program, and the Mayor's office will match the money that you've raised and clear the way for permissions as well. So that's a big difference, I think, for how public services are run. You're becoming more of a platform rather than dictating what should happen. Finn Williams, who's also working within the GLA, is interested in. I mean, it was David this morning who mentioned bringing the government into the office because the expertise simply isn't in the government anymore. So he set up and that's a graph of. Excuse me. That's a graph of the red line is the number of architects employed by the state in London. So it's more like 1% now. So that expertise has been completely hollowed out. And he's just launched a week ago a project called Public Practice, which is really a sort of, what do you call it, placement program for architects to go into public sector to understand that, learn that, and hopefully feed talent into the public sector, where it doesn't exist. Frank Duffy, again, shearing layers, practice of continual reinvention. Dan already explained it this morning. This is my neighbour, John Worthington. He lives next door in an apartment building. He's the W in DEGW, so we started the business with Frank. And he talks, we've been talking a lot about the model of his practice of DEGW, which was really a workplace consultancy, but they all trained as architects. And this diagram I thought was fascinating. So it's quite hard to read, but and I don't know if my pointer will work, but effectively that process that you can see is the whole building process, from researching the idea of the project right through to post-occupancy evaluation and maintenance of the building itself. The grey area in the middle is the area that architecture is traditionally concerned with. That's from when the brief arrives on your desk and when you've handed over the keys. And he's saying the high value and the high importance aspects are outside of that territory, and that we need to therefore expand our practice to include things like management, maintenance, and redevelopment. He says the project isn't the building, it's the client, and you need to make that relationship and continue that over decades rather than months. Okay, Oh, almost there. Final example, Robin Boyd, who is a certain hero of mine. For those of you who don't know, and everyone will except for perhaps Marissa and Minsuk, he was an architect, educator, polemicist, you name it, here in Melbourne, really practicing in the 50s and 60s and 70s. He wrote this screed against the suburbs and against featureism and the decorative Australiana that people would cover their houses with. For him, it wasn't good taste. Modernism was the way. And so to bring that about, he set up, with the Age newspaper, the Small Home Service. So every week, they would publish a new house design, and you could buy the plans from the newspaper. He had a room of draftspeople. And that's how the suburbs were built in the 70s. People would buy the plans, very cheap, give them to a builder, and there you go. Modern, clean, beautiful living. And as Searle tells us, 50,000 homes were built through this. So again, that's a scale. So I think what we need is the Small Homes Adaptation Service. Again, we can work with the media, we can get a studio together, we can then look at the legacy of small homes, revisit those suburbs, the outer suburbs, and apply some of these ideas in that context. That's my pitch. So if anyone wants to talk about that, I'll be outside.